And a drum roll.
Welcome everyone to Book at Lunchtime. I will be asking Henrike to introduce every book at lunchtime like that going forward. We're in our 13th Michaelmas, 13 years. So for those of you who are not grizzled veterans of Torch Book at Lunchtime, we have been going since the very start of Torch in 2013, and we are now well over 100 books, which are all viewable by the magic of YouTube on our YouTube channel, as this will be very, very soon. So today we welcome an esteemed panel and a wonderful author to discuss the life of nuns. And I did pick out one particular review. The Life of Nuns has been described as the liveliest and most readable account of medieval nunnery or nunnery life available today, or indeed available ever, possibly. So joining Henrike on the panel today are two esteemed scholars here at Oxford, Professor Lyndall Roper from the History Faculty and Professor Nancy Thibault from the Department of Art History. I know that we're in for a very, very entertaining session today, so thank you all so much for coming. And don't forget to share the video in a few weeks' time when it is available through the magic of our film crew here today. I will hand over to either Henrike or our chair, depending on how they wish to proceed. Thank you so much for all coming and enjoy the session.
Thank you, John, and it's just wonderful what Torch does in making books that Oxford scholars produce known and discussed, because you can write a book, but then it often feels kind of like, well, what happened to that book? And this is a really important way of creating a scholarly community across disciplines. So thank you, John. So I'm delighted to introduce today, first of all, Nancy Thibault from History of Art. She's just arrived here, and she's curating the exhibition Love, Sex and Gender in the Middle Ages, which will be at the Cloisters in New York. So it is fabulous that you're joining us here in Oxford, which I'm told is the largest community of medievalists in the world. I'm not sure.
Yes, it is.
Nancy will also be publishing the catalogue for the exhibition. So that's taken her into looking at the late medieval period, having worked originally on Carolingian and Ottonian work. And what interests her in particular are feminist and queer perspectives, and she's interested in the idea of mystical union. So it's just great to have you discuss Henrike's book. Henrike wanted me also to mention in introducing Henrike, and you are someone who doesn't need an introduction, but she wanted me to mention that she is the successor of Nigel Palmer, who was Professor of Medieval German. And I feel his spirit very much here. He was an amazing, gentle, warm person who brought so many of us together and who created networks right across this university, but also right across the world. Henrike is the herald of medieval studies. She and I often work together across the divide, late medieval, I'm sort of Reformation, and it's really exciting to work with Henrike, and also wonderful to see this book, which I would like to hand around so that you can have a look at it while you eat. Because I think there are many things that are important about this book, one of which is it makes really visible the sheer wealth and diversity of the creativity of medieval nuns. So if one is thinking about women's lives in the past, you've really changed how we must think about all of that. And it's also really hit back at a very long-lasting Protestant understanding of late medieval convents as hotbeds of sexual disorder and as places that should be enclosed. And the Counter-Reformation also saw convents as institutions that should be enclosed. But of course, that's a very particular point of view. And once you enclose women, you also limit them. So Henrike takes us back to a world which we have to see with really new eyes to understand its creativity and power. So thank you, Henrike.
Thanks a lot. Lyndall and I have done several adventures together across the period divide, and it's fascinating for me to look at nuns through their own eyes while having looked at them from the Protestant historiography perspective for a long time. What I thought I would give you today is a brief background into how this book came into being, which was for Eva Schlothäuber and me the first venture into what's called trade book or popular writing. It started with our research into the Nuns network, and it started right here in Oxford. I don't know how many of you have been in the old library of St. Edmund Hall, which is my college, which was where we held our first project meeting with one of Lyndall Roper's former doctoral students at Wareham, who became the first postdoc on the project to edit 1,800 letters collected and written by the nuns of Kloster Lüne, which is near Hamburg, and which was the wealthiest Hanseatic town of the Middle Ages because its wealth was founded on the salt trade. And this salt trade financed 6 convents, 3 Benedictines, 3 Cistercians, and they accumulated a wealth of riches, books, and knowledge, and they communicated this wealth. And these 1,800 letters are probably the largest stash of unpublished women's writing available to us. We are now a third through the project. You can read all of the letters published so far, open access, online, and we were very lucky in getting financial support by the Gerda Henkel Stiftung. And the Gerda Henkel Stiftung is quite good in public outreach, and so they contacted Der Spiegel, which is the largest German news magazine, and they published a 2-page article about the project, and in which they picked up some phrases of what we had said and made up some further phrases. So we had talked about die Lehrkinder des Klosters, so the girls who were brought to the convent to be educated, aged 7 to 9, a bit like choir boys coming here to New College School, and we had talked about their education. And the headline ran, "The nuns had children," and then went on from there. So we were contacted by Ullstein, a popular publisher in Germany, whether we could write a book on the sex life of the nuns. And we said we couldn't and wouldn't do that, but we had something much better to offer, namely revealing the real life of nuns and trying to tell this through the women's own voices. So making use of these unparalleled rich sources that we had from the community of nuns, and you see here the group of nuns in a panel painting from the 16th century, having a vision of the crucified Christ. So, and you see here what looks like a toast leaf is actually the first of the 3 big letter books that we are editing. So this provided us with really insight into the business dealings, into the power of persuasion, into the rhetorical skills across the languages, Latin and German, and to provide what is called in German a roter Faden, a thread like Ariadne's thread running through it, we decided to combine it with another untapped source, namely a fairly substantial diary of a nun from Braunschweig, the other capital of the Duchy of Braunschweig, Lüneburg, and a place with which the Lüne nuns corresponded, which details in this little book that she had produced herself by scraping down discarded liturgical parchment to tell the story of enclosure of education through her eyes or through her mouth. We aren't quite sure why she wrote it down. She particularly gives us a story also of what went wrong. And it might be a kind of cautionary bookkeeping for the next generation, how to take in the laundry before the bishop arrives, things like that. It might also be an exercise in Latin rhetoric, because other than the Lüne nuns who write a very educated, sometimes verse letter, she makes quite a bit of mistakes. So it would be a kind of lower second in a prose composition in Latin, probably in an Oxford context. But she can tell a story through her grammatical mistakes. And Eva Schlothäuber had edited this diary for her Habilitation, so the second book you have to write in Germany, but it had been in an unaffordable big volume just in Latin. And so we tried to liberate the voice of this nun by translating it, paraphrasing the stories and making them the starting point for each of it was then 6 chapters of Unerhörte Frauen. And it surprisingly seems to have resonated, these voices. So we've now sold 13,000 copies of the German volume. But what is more remarkable, and which I think the nuns would have enjoyed hugely, is it was made into the table reading for the Benedictine abbeys of Maria Laach and Münster-Schwarzach, the 2 largest male Benedictine communities. And to have the men sit and eat quietly while it was read from their letters and their diary, I think would have enjoyed them. So that is the story behind the German volume. But from the start, we really wanted to make this material available more widely, because it's not well known beyond Germany that so much of this survives in comparison with the dissolution of the monasteries in England or the French Revolution, or even in Italy, where there were much more political upheavals, that the monasteries and convents in Germany quite often survived through shape-shifting to other institutions, but never being dissolved. And the most remarkable case are these 6 Lüneburg convents, which all still exist, never have been dissolved. So never anything was thrown away. I have a little box you might want to look in later, where I've collected some facsimiles of things that were found under the floorboards of the convent in Wienhausen, so under the floorboards of this nuns' choir. They found over 2,000 objects, among them the oldest spectacles in the world. So they found writing implements, sewing implements. So the whole everyday life evidence can not only be gleaned from the writing, but also from the objects themselves. as I said, that was the reason for us to want to make it available in English and to make it available as widely as possible. And high praise both to Ullstein for releasing the text without fuss, and to Open Book Publishers in Cambridge, who agreed to put it out in different formats. So you can listen to it as audiobook, you can read it as English. And a huge thanks to Anne Simon, who's here in the audience, who provided the translation. She came also up with several suggestions for the title, because the title in German, it must be admitted, is better. Unerhört means both unheard but also unheard of. And we tried numerous suggestions for coming up with a similarly punny title, but it ended all being slightly off. And we didn't want to fall again into the trap of sex in the convent. So we discarded the outrageous habits, even though it's quite fun to listen to. But since really the idea is to make the voices heard, I thought I would briefly take you through the chapter on music, which we use to tell the story of girls who were educated in singing, reading music, music theory. You see here the hand of Guido, which way around is it? Yeah, this way, where the cantricks could show intervals and how they learned. And it's in a nurturing way, like the storks are feeding their young, that this instruction happens. And they learn, obviously, music to be able to sing the liturgy, but they also were enabled through that to write down secular music and songs they had heard when they were children, or to write their own songs. So this is a songbook from Wienhausen, another of the Lüneburg convents, and where you see the music is a song probably written by the nuns themselves, a dialogue between Jesus and the loving soul, a role in which the nuns themselves saw. Heb op dein Kreuz in allerliebeste Brut. And that is a very much a meditative song about the journey of the soul in dialogue with Christ. But directly before it, where you see this A initial, there is a mock song about the stupidity of male clergy. It tells the story of a little donkey who can sing E-A. So you see it in a boss from Ebsdorf. The German letters I and A are pronounced as the donkey bray. So E-A is what the donkey is singing here. And in the manuscript, we have over several of these lines bis, meaning twice to be sung, which implies that it was a song where you would have a bit like a stand-up comedy, one nun singing and the rest answering or joining in the chorus of the text. And this is a situation we can actually trace in the diary of the nun, where she reports on a celebration that went out of hand because they were busy flax breaking, and for this occasion, where you needed rhythmical singing, it was allowed that also the young clergy was allowed to join in the flax breaking and the singing. And they started with sacred songs, then they sang, as the diarist notes, slightly less sacred songs. And then the young novices and the young clergy started making up songs as they went along. In German, you would call it Stanzeln singen, so spontaneous song production addressed to the abbess and to the provost, which resulted then in the provost banning growing flags at the convent in the future to provide that. So I thought we could enact this song. As you saw in the manuscript, it doesn't have a tune of its own, but we know the type of tunes used for these secular songs from the Rostock songbook, which a colleague of ours, Franz Josef Holznagel, has edited, and he kindly provided me with a tune. So I'll sing the song, and where it says bis, where the lines marked in yellow, I'll repeat, and you repeat with me, and it has 4 stanzas, and I'm sure at the 4th stanza you'll have caught on with the tune. Azellos in der Mola, na Mola von sim Herrn, Presum serat in Skola, he wollt sin Lexje lern. Magister Bonadies, der Esel sprach mit Lewe, Pax intervos et quies, ich lerne gerne Breve. Everybody. Pax intervos et quies, ich lerne gerne Breve. Komm, Esel ist dumm, sprich Latin, du bist nicht dumm. Vis saccus oblivissi. Och, gut gemach, woll ich wünschen all de Dach. Si possem adipissi. Si sirem alphabetum, von Stund wolltet studieren, jus leges et decretum, danach mocht ich pladeren. Pro magna prebenda, ich tokore singe, dum clamo, vox est ea, der Sack schall mich nicht zwingen. Everybody. Dum clamo, vox est ea, der Sack schall mich nicht zwingen. Leer, sehr, Esele sehr, du wirst noch wohl in Grotte hell. Mux potest doctrinari, sing, Esele kling, das wart noch gut alle Ding. Si vis presbyterari. Si esem tam beatus, dort ich ein Priester wurde, hic esset deo gratus, de mine misse horde, de in de Predikarem grot afflat woldig gäven, und saccos non portarem, so woldig sachte läven, und saccos non portarem, so woldig sachte leben. Du, dehem also, gato core, singe ho, nam vox est tibi bona, Ja, da hat ich gar, wenn ich over missen star, portantum mihi dona. Hic missam, dumm cantavit, do kam der Eseldriever, hunk wusste verba rabit, wo wurzte nu in Schriebe. Curdecipis sic plebis, wohlher, Lob in den Molen, Saccos portare debis, beide Schleppen und Sohlen. Saccos portare debis, beide Schleppen und Sohlen. Ach, hätt ich doch se getragen Winten noch, tunk esset mis Wabe. And then the narrator comes in. Vorwahr, wertet diesen zwar, der Schalup sie in olden Jahr, Pondus portare Grabe. And the moral of the story, start with learning Latin early. All right.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond?
Sure. Thank you, Henrike. This was wonderful. It's not only like a rigorous scholarly book, but I just love how fun it is too, and you just made that very clear to all of us here. So I want to say first, congratulations. A few things I really like about the book, and then I have some questions for you. So the first thing, I think this book is really quite strong, and it's just its inclusivity. I mean, the fact that I think a lot of students and members of the general public will learn a lot from reading this, but it's also such a gift for scholars who've been working also for a long time in this area precisely because of the sources you're including. And it's also one thing that I really like as an art historian is just how interdisciplinary this book is. You include images throughout the book, really giving us a sense of the rich material culture of these female monastic communities that you're working on, and not just using the images as like illustrations of historical phenomena, which I confess is something that a lot of historians tend to do. So I like that you really give them like agency in their own right and think about the rhetoric of these images. And this is something you mentioned, but I also love that because of the nature of the sources you're using, you really give these women a voice. Like, I mean, the analytical work that you and Ava do is so important for helping us understand these sources, but I also like that at moments you two just step out of the way to like really allow us to hear these women's accounts of their deep emotional lives, events that happen at the convent, and just the rich material culture details that come out of this too. I mean, just to cite a few examples of things that I was really surprised to learn about, like, nuns painting their face so they won't be seen at night when they go out, writing prayers on strips of parchment and giving them to dogs to eat to cure an illness. On one occasion, someone snipping off a nun's braids at an investiture ceremony, and these braids are then later found beneath the floorboards. There's just all these rich details that are left out of most historical and art historical accounts of nuns, so thank you for including all those rich details. And then the other thing is, I think, Lyndall already pointed out that you're making some really important interventions here in the way we think about both pre and post-Reformation life in convents. This is, often this is framed as a story of like an abrupt change, and actually it's one of continuity and sometimes even stasis. But I think another intervention that you're making that is perhaps more subtle but equally important is the way that you foreground love and friendship in this book. So, and this is getting us to think more about the emotional lives of women. And, sure, this isn't a book about the sex lives of nuns, but I think that love and friendship is actually far more interesting, radical, even like queer, I'd say, like the way these women are thinking about the central role that friendship plays in their lives. Anyway, I've lots to say about this, but I think that it might be worth just sharing with others that there has been some work on male friendship in the Middle Ages, but less so on friendship between women. And I like that, you give us a sense of these important, biblical references. I'm thinking specifically like in the Old Testament, but also exegetical treatises on friendship written in the Middle Ages to help us understand theoretically how people are thinking about what spiritual friendship is. But then in the letters, you invite us to think about, okay, concretely, how does friendship play out here? So, the idea that friendship can be expressed in gifts, for instance, like giving cows, lending a carriage, showing a relic to someone, the role of wit and humor in the expression of friendship, conflict between friends and the resolution, like we're all human is like a quote from one of the letters that I loved, friendships lost, the communal nature of friendships. These are not exclusionary relationships that really involve like the whole community. And you really bring these to life so well. And this part of the book has really, the way you foreground friendship has been important in my own study of images made by or used by nuns during this period, specifically in this project that Lyndall brought up, this exhibition I'm co-curating with Melanie Holcomb at the Cloisters next year. And so I wanted, to invite you to think with us a little bit more about images that you include in this chapter, because I think that people might be surprised that in a chapter on friendship between women, we have this super important sculpture of Christ and St. John, two men. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how this is working here, both in maybe modeling friendship for the nuns, facilitating it, but also this really close tie between friendship and mystical union. for us. Yeah.
And also, could you comment on the size? Because I found that amazing.
That's why I included, I haven't in the book this image of the choir or the choir of Heiligkreuztal, but I thought it would be helpful to see how it's situated in a niche of its own. So it's about 2/3 life size. And it was always on a slightly raised level. And if you look at Christ's eye, if you're standing as a nun before that image, you can get into the dialogue. And we included this quotation from Gertrud von Helfta in the volume, where she has a vision of John the Evangelist, the disciple whom Jesus loved, according to the Gospel of John and the medieval association. And she asked John to show her his real nature, and he turns into an overflowing stream and sweeps her up into the embrace together with Christ. So they are a big huddle of embraces in this universal stream of overflowing love, because the divine love cannot be contained. It spills over in encompassing the whole community. And it's a constant playing via the role of the Song of Songs, in which the nuns saw themselves, in which they projected John, and also the figure of the bridegroom is playing between the genders. So in the meeting prayer books, Christ then becomes the wisdom advising, grammatically female, and Christ is the rising Easter sun, which in German again is female, which is illuminating. And so a lot of the imagery transcends a binary nature of love or marriage. But so the gesture that you see here, Christ supporting the right, with his right hand, the right hand of John the Evangelist, is the gesture of betrothal between a couple. It's also the gesture described in the Song of Songs of the lover supporting his bride by putting both hands on them. And you have this physical interaction with the statues. We have from Wienhausen, for example, the dresses which the nuns did for the statues to put on them for feast days. But it's less kind of doll playing and more really sensory reminder of something to meditate upon. So in the same way in which in the manuscripts, let's see where, yeah, this here, where you have the gold of the Easter sun seeping through the text into the prayer of the nun herself, encouraging her to brighten up and to join the community of the angels and of the lay people. In the same way, the materiality of the statues helped for a higher meditation.
Right. I have more questions, but if you want to take over for a bit, feel free. Oh, I mean, of course, I want to hear more about images, but maybe I'll shift to something else just momentarily. I mean, since we're talking about like the emotional encounters that these women have with these objects, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit too about your own emotional encounters with these sources. I mean, I'm thinking of specifically. I mean, there aren't a lot of moments in the book where you make like past-present connections, except for, if I'm not mistaken, on the chapter on illness and dying, where you think about like the art of care that these nuns that they have in taking care of themselves, their communities, compared to maybe how we treat sick and dying people today. But I was really moved by this photograph in the book of the nun's diary and someone's hands on it. And you're showing us here the last page where we know that this nun stopped writing and probably died from the plague. And I'm just, I'd love to hear more just about like what what was your emotional encounter like with these objects?
Yeah. That's what has fascinated me from the start, the immense centrality of the material objects, and but also the remarkable fact to be able to encounter these objects still in the setting. So the wall that is in this panel painting is still there in Kloster Lüne, and the panel painting itself still hangs on the nuns' choir. And so in December, I'm going there again and will be singing Vespers directly sitting below that painting with a women living as a Protestant Benedictine community there in the convent, and having looked after these treasures since they were first by their predecessors done. It was quite remarkable during COVID. So I teach history of the book here, and we have 3 manuscripts from Meeting actually in the Bodleian library. And 2 of the master students had been working on these volumes, cataloging, transcribing, and we have excellent scans available, high resolution, so there was no stopping them from scholarly engagement. But all of the students said the highlight of their year was when, at the end of the academic year, the restrictions lifted, they were allowed into the Bodleian and could hold it in their hands. And one of the students wrote a blog post about it, Blind Date with a Book, where she is seen with a mask on, but you can see her wide grin through the mask, really holding this book in her hands, yeah.
I just wondered if we should explain whether everyone knows about Protestant convents. Is that all a thing? You're all happy with that? It's just there's a wonderful study that's just been done of them by Beth Plummer.
Yeah.
And they turn out to be a much more widespread phenomenon than I think we had realised. And these are convents which, when all the male convents in Protestant areas were dissolved and the monks sort of went away, it turned out to be much harder to dissolve the female convents. And there are ones that have continued as Protestant convents. So it's not here. Anglican convents tend to be 19th century, but in Germany there is an unbroken tradition in some of these Protestant convents. And you might want to just explain.
And it's due to really the letters the nuns wrote. So because of their standing up, that we have these 1,800 letters in the form of the copies that the nuns did, is due to the fact that they wanted to demonstrate to the Duke of Braunschweig-Lüneburg that they always had been independent, spiritually and economically. And they made their case so persuasively and forcefully in between. So it had been named as the Nuns' War, slightly wrongly because it was physical force from the side, from the Duke rather than the side, but they countered by just persisting in their worship and then negotiating a way of life forward, which we can trace in their manuscripts. So the only thing they had to concede was to stop asking for the intercession of saints. So you see erased just the word intercessio, but practically nothing else. So you can just mentally fill that in the blank normally. And to take communion under both forms, so bread and wine. But they could, yeah.
And didn't they have to listen to Lutheran sermons as well?
But they were allowed to pick their own Lutheran preacher. So we have letters saying this man is just preaching crap. If you continue having him sent, we'll just won't go. In between, they were throwing rags set to fire down into the church to produce fumes to fume out the Protestant preacher. They were singing their own liturgy loudly against the Lutheran hymns downstairs until they got their way of appointing their own confessor. And they were allowed to keep their Latin liturgy, their habit, and actually the point where then they became squarely Protestant is for the Lüneburg convents, more or less the 30-year War, where they boxed away the former prayer books and then didn't really return to that. But for example, the convent of Mariensee here near Hanover is still part of the Cistercian general chapter, and the abbess goes there to the annual meeting of the Cistercian abbesses and abbots. So they very much see themselves in both traditions.
Any general questions, comments that people would like to make? I must say one thing that really struck me is the sense of humour, and just the creativity that goes with the sense of humour, and that ability to tell a story. I've been reading some nuns' chronicles from the Peasants' War, and the way that they tell what happened in the Peasants' War and the way that male chroniclers talk about it is very different. Their way of talking about it is much more local, much more personal. It's interesting, they often get the news quite wrong, and they're very, their account of what happened isn't right. But they have a series of stories that are unforgettable and extremely funny, like the point where they grab up all the nuns' slippers because they're going to have to leave the convent, but they don't want anyone to know that they're going to flee. So they've got all the slippers in a bag and they're going across the town market square, and the slippers fall out of the bag. So the cat is literally out of the bag and everyone knows the nuns are off. It's things like that which are included, which you just wouldn't forget, and which suggest that people are telling these stories, they know how to tell them, and they know how to construct them so that they're funny. And I just wondered about that and about what you thought about humour, because it's so strong in what you presented.
They, as part of their education, they had very much like Oxford students, their weekly prose composition to write. And they were encouraged to write it on everyday incidents, particularly from the convent of Ebsdorf, where we have all the girls' textbooks and exercise books still. They were then really trying to write on things like how the provost fell from the ladder when he was trying to pick the last apples, or about the leaky roof, or a classic with all students, the dreadful food, and so they really trained for seeing the unusual side in the everyday life going on. I tried to record a few videos around Oxford and sites where religious women lived, just to show how much is lost if you compare the skyline of Wienhausen and the skyline of Godstow. Wienhausen cannot help really to literally fill the gaps by looking at, we have the letters of how much cement was delivered to Wienhausen to build the extension. We know the names of the 3 nuns that painted the choir. We know they were all called 3 Gertrud, and the Chronicle notes it not because it were women painting it, but because it was so funny that we're all 3 Gertruds. And we have this image in the last chapter because it really speaks about the self-view of the nuns. This up here is a picture of the heavenly Jerusalem guarded by the angels, which is above the door, which is here on the right-hand side, just off the image. It's the door through which they went out of the choir. So they would process in from the west end and go out at the east end of the choir after having said their hours. So they would, you see here just the door top a bit. So they would pass underneath the guarding angel. But if you compare the skyline here of heavenly Jerusalem, which has a gable, how do you call the Treppengiebel? Step gable, which has these octagonal little spiral staircases to walk up. You have the little bell tower to ring the bell. You have, you have the high choir and the lower church below. You have a lower east end of the church. And then look at Wienhausen. You have the stepped gable, you have the staircases, you have here this part with the Gothic windows is the nuns' choir. Below is the parish church for the lay people, much more low-ceilinged. You have also the lower end for the male clergy. So what they had, they were already in heavenly Jerusalem, sitting in the choir and being guarded by angels. But perhaps also on the topic of humor, an image that Nancy asked me to include is how they retell the story of Tristan and Isolde. It's a story that here has a happy ending because they sail away in the, framed it slightly different. So it ends with Tristan and Isolde in each other's arm. But in the center of the whole tapestry is, let me see, I need the other image. No, I can't get it quickly. So you have just to trust me that this is the center of the whole tapestry. It's how the women rescue the wounded Tristan, who is playing the fiddle and who is pulled into the Tower of Dublin. and then they heal him. So you have these towering women, the tiny Tristan in the middle. He sails back to England, Cornwall, then comes again to Ireland to fight the dragon, is poisoned by the fumes of the dragon's breath. So swoons, is again picked up by the women, who put him in a bathtub to rinse the dragon's breath off him. And in the text versions of the story by Gottfried von Tristan, Gottfried von Straßburg, or Thomas of Bretagne, it's the point where Isolde discovers that Tristan's sword has a missing bit. And great, yeah, you have the full picture. And she wants to kill him because he has killed her uncle. But the nuns write a new Low German caption for it and says, "Here Frau Isolde guards Tristan," sitting in the bathtub. So they really retell the whole story from the point of view, like a graphic novel of the women holding firmly the strings of the narrative.
Yeah, I love how just the women are really in control of their own image in these works of art. And I think that's maybe like going to be surprising for some readers, like, you know, casting Wienhausen as the heavenly Jerusalem, inserting such strong female presence in the tapestry. And even the fact that you have a tapestry with courtly romance on it, I think will surprise a lot of readers too. But it's another reminder of the fact that this like secular sacred divide in the Middle Ages like doesn't really exist. They're always like kind of infiltrating each other.
To come back to Lindel's question about the materiality and the fascination of working with that, I think the most eye-opening days for me during my last decade of working with this material was when I was in the textile restoration workshop, which is for all of Lower Saxony in Klosterlüne. And the textile restorers were working on these dresses for the statues in Kloster Wienhausen. And what they had found were that they were backed with parchment pieces as hem stiffeners, because these dresses are hemmed with white rabbit fur to imitate ermine. And that's very soft material, and they wanted this to look sculptural. So they were backing it with parchment and pulled a rough thread through it, so like you have curtains, Vorhängerraffen, how do you call it, to kind of gather the pleats of the curtains. So they get, and the parchment at the back was literally cross-cut of what was discarded in the late 15th century. So you could see the nuns working on renewing their texts, on inserting, but also working with the materiality of their own. Nothing is thrown away, everything is repurposed. And parchment is a wonderful material because it's pretty much indestructible. You can't dissolve it in water as you can paper. You can't burn it unless you try really hard, but it's not easily inflammable. So what I discovered there were, for example, snippets of the Saxon law, because the nuns were large landowners, but they had decided to go over to the more modern Roman law. So they didn't need any longer these large folio volumes of vernacular law, and they made it into sewing guards. I discovered a rhymed Low German retelling of the Passion, which is probably a sign that, again, they wanted to up the literacy level of the convent. So we've talked about briefly the Reformation, but for the nuns, the word reformatio didn't mean the 16th century Reformation. It meant the reform of their own life in the late 15th century. All of these convents in Lower Saxony underwent a reform of life in the mid 15th century to the end of the 15th century. And here you see the reform as imagined by the Meding nuns. It meant a renewal of community life. It meant writing new books in Latin for the liturgy, but also for textbooks. So a general renewal of spiritual life, and that resulted then again in recycling more simple, old-fashioned vernacular tellings of the Bible stories. Or another dress had a short version of the life of St. Agnes, who was a popular female saint for the convents, because from her life there were snippets in the liturgy for the coronation of the nuns. And again, we can trace in Wienhausen a much longer and more elaborate Latin life. So you can see them working through their own material culture by doing a bit of archaeology of these dresses. It's a wonderful chance. It takes some patience. I know I worked with a musicologist, you probably know Ulrike Hascher-Burger, who said she had never drank so much tea in her life than when trying to convince the abbesses to let her access all the liturgical manuscripts. But these are conversations really worth having, and it's wonderful. We launched the first volume of the Lüne letters in Kloster Lüne for the 850th anniversary of the convent, introduced by the abbess. And we knew, other than most scholarly volumes, this would be read on the same day by the women living there, and it would be included in their next training for the local guides doing guided tours of the convent. It would find, and it has found now, its way in the little museum exhibition, changing labels. And I know impact has its problematic sides, and to do it always quantitatively and qualitatively can be cumbersome. But it's so rewarding, really, to see a change in attitude to the past unfolding before your eyes, and not just speaking into an empty void or into the library bookshelves.
And can I just ask finally, because this book is a collaboration between the two of you, and it also involved a lot of translation, and you've worked with so many other groups of people and individuals to make it happen. How would you reflect on that?
Again, it requires patience, even just a historian's approach. Eva Schlothäuber, really eager to get to the content level as quickly as possible, while I said, oh, isn't that exciting? This is a neologism from Latin in Low German. We have to really mark that out. We have to prioritize the glossary. And she said, oh, well, but first we have to have the proper Personenregister. Yeah. And so we ended up with having a digital edition which you can switch between a diplomatic view of the text and normalized version. So if you just want to dive right in. We also then made sure, with me being based in Oxford, Eva being based in Düsseldorf, that we can't provide translation for all 1,800 letters. It's just too vast. But we have done summaries for every letter, and they are both in German and in English. And I really enjoyed working with Simon also on the translation of the book, realizing what needs to be explained for a different audience. And it helps you to reflect on what is significant about the material if you then translate it from one language to the other. And I just love the language of the nuns, and that's partly why I wanted to sing with you the full song, because also their humor is in their what we would talk perhaps Denglish, so a mix of German and English. So they write and speak a Latin Low German mix. And what is probably also important to say is these testimonies are the closest we can get to medieval orality, because so much of the other surviving documents are sanitized for public consumption. This is their private documentation, so they don't need to be intelligible for an international audience. They speak an in-group language, and we can, in a way, listen into their personal, private conversations, effortlessly code switching between their childhood language of local dialect and the learned language of Latin. And my favorite letters are those which are between nuns, and where they can rely on people being able to decode this language of convent-raised women who would... Ik heb gehoord dat je weet muteren habitum vestrum. So the habitum vestrum is your habit, and muteren is from Latin mutare, but with a Low German ending. And ik heb gehoord, I've heard, is the Low German way of expressing. And I found also with working on this material with students, it's actually more accessible than the high rhetoric of Latin only, or the business letters of the Hanseatic League, which are written in very formal Low German to be legally binding. You have there this really the sense of listening into a conversation of voices that had been lost for centuries.
Thank you, Henrike. I think that's a wonderful place to stop. And I think what Henrike has done is give you a sense of why you really need to read this book. It's just such fun. And I think what she hasn't said, but what you may have noticed, is the kind of expertise that you need to make this accessible. And what I love about your scholarship is the way that that expertise is worn so lightly, and it covers so many different areas and involves the contributions of many people as well. And then Henrike opens it up so that it is accessible for everyone to understand and to think with, and to change their mind about what late medieval religion was like, what it was possible for women to do and to think, and just how funny they were. So thank you very much, Henrike. We are all in your debt.